There are three ways that you can track time in Office Tools Workspace: manual entry, time cards, and you can also run timers. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about all three of these different methods. The first one, and in a lot of ways probably the most common, is just manual entry. And you're going to do that by navigating to the Time tab here at the top of the screen. Now when you do so, you're going to see a mini calendar over on the left. This is going to show you both days that currently have time tracked for them in orange, and in a brighter orange, a bolder color, you're going to see the current day you have selected. So I'm currently on the 24th, and I can see that I have time tracked on the 23rd also. So if I wanted to go back and look, I would know that there's some time tracked for that day. Or if there's any days that I may have missed, I want to go back and make sure that I enter my time in for those days. On the right, I can see my name because I'm the one who's actually logged in, and I have the Timesheet Manager user right. Now that user right allows me to view other people's timesheets also. Below that, I can see a summary of the day. I can see my total hours, my billable hours, non-billable, and so on. And again, the billable amount field is actually controlled by user right, so you may or may not want to show this, obviously depending on the staff member's role. Okay, below that is where we actually have our fields to enter in our time card. So what you're going to want to do here is make sure that you have a blank entry available and highlight it in orange, which is what you're seeing here. And the fields above that are actually where you enter and modify the data. Below that in orange and subsequently below those is where you're actually going to see the time entries. So as a best practice, what you're going to want to do is start over on the left and choose your contact. All of these fields you can search in, and you use the tab key to navigate and bounce from left to right. That's going to be the quickest and most efficient way of tracking time. So starting on the left, I'm going to go ahead and type in a couple letters for the client that I want to track some time for and hit tab, which will bounce me over to the project field. If this client had a project or I wanted to track time to a specific project, I could go ahead and choose whatever that project may be. Hitting the tab key again brings me over to the work codes. And at this point, I can also go ahead and choose the appropriate work code. Now, because I have my rate set up, Workspace knows what my particular rate is when I use the 1040 individual work code. So when I now go over to the start and end times or the total quantity and actually track my time, so I'll go ahead and put from 10 to 11, the system knows that that's 1 hour worth of time, and when I complete my time card, it'll go ahead and track my billable rate. However, I do have a notes field, so this is probably going to be a good time to go ahead and enter in a note. So now I can see I have a time entry. It's completed. It has the client, project if required, my work code, and obviously my time and note information. If I needed another work code, I would go ahead and obviously repeat that same process. So that's going to be a manual time card entry. Some other specific things about this screen that I want to point out is you can also track expenses and mileage by associating them to a time card from this screen. So in the context of doing this particular work right here, I can go ahead and highlight it and actually come up to the top of the screen here under expenses and add an expense. Likewise, I could also add mileage. If this is billable time or if they're billable expenses, all of that will be available under the billing tab, and likewise I can obviously invoice that later on. The other ways of tracking time are through time cards and timers. So let's talk about timers for just a moment and then we'll cover time cards. So timers are just that. They are timers and they're available throughout the program. You'll notice them on the toolbar under each tab, and it's the small clock icon. Clicking on that will go ahead and open up a timer. And if you have a default work code set up for yourself, then it'll actually populate that work code for you and begin running the timer immediately. If you have not chosen default work codes for yourself, I highly recommend you do so. If for any reason, it simplifies how timers are going to work for you. You don't have to stop and then choose a work code each time. However, I click the clock, my timer is now running. I could, if I were so inclined, actually come to the work codes and choose a different code. Just like in the manual entry, I can also choose projects and put in notes. When I'm done, I simply stop my timer and I hit the Create Time Card button. The timer goes away and the entry that I created or the timer that I tracked is now posted on my actual timesheet. Now there's some other thing with timers I want to point out. So I'm going to go ahead and run that timer again. I'll bring it up on the screen here. There we go. So you can start and stop timers. Now you have some really neat controls that you're able to do with timers if you begin to use them in this way. So I'm going to go and start my timer again, and you'll see here that I have a contact, which is ABC Company, and I'm working on their tax return. So like real life is, I get interrupted. So for one reason or another, I'm going to go ahead and stop my timer and go about doing whatever the other task may be. When I come back, I can go ahead and restart this timer. Now before I do so, I want everyone to kind of pay attention to the actual time that I have tracked. I have about 12 seconds tracked. And I know that's a small amount of time, but I'm sure you guys understand. However, I'm going to go ahead and restart my timer, and you'll see the clock actually reset itself back to 0 and begin counting anew. Now I did not lose that original time entry. That 12 seconds is still in the system, and in fact, I'm going to go and stop this one again. Down here on the bottom of the timer, I can see that I have 2 timers recorded. Okay, opening this up will actually show me the timers, and I can go about deleting them, posting them, and various other options. When I'm done tracking time for this client through these timers, I can go ahead and hit Create Time Card again. However, this time, it's going to ask me would I like to combine my timers, assuming the client, code, and or projects are all the same. If I changed clients or I used a different work code in between one of those timers, it would break them all out individually. However, because in this example they're all the same, I have a choice. I can either combine them into a single time entry for the total amount of all the timers, or what I'm going to do is actually say no, and it will break those out into 2 individual time entries. That, of course, is something up to your discretion depending on how you're tracking your time and how you want it to actually be entered into the system. Another thing that you're able to do is the same multi-code or multi-client timers from actually one timer itself. So just to do that, I'm going to simply open that timer back up. I'm going to begin running it for ABC Company. Okay, I'm going to stop my timer, and now I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to start working for another client on another client's return perhaps, and run my timer again. Just like before, the original timer is recorded and saved. So I can go ahead and stop this one and choose a third client and run a timer for them. Likewise, I can choose different projects and different work codes while I'm doing this. And the idea being is really you can have one timer open all day, and throughout your day for various clients or services or whatever it may be that you're tracking, you turn your timer on and off and you change the codes and the clients involved. When you're all done, you stop your timers, you hit Create Time Card, and it'll go ahead and populate your timesheet with the different clients, codes, and projects that you may have selected. Okay, and again, timers are available on the toolbar by clicking on the little clock right here at the top. So we've talked about manual entry, where we simply come into the Time tab and we fill in the blanks. I've also shown you timers on how you can actually pull those up and run them. The last thing about timers, however, before we move on, is that they can be minimized and hidden. So what I'm going to do, again, just to show you, I pull my timer up, I can actually minimize it, make it go away. And a lot of people struggle with this sometimes because they feel that they've lost their timer or that it's closed. It's not. What it's doing is it's actually hiding in your taskbar down here on the bottom of the screen. And we can see that down here under the Office Tools Workspace timer. Now this is a kind of an odd way to approach it, but it's very handy because it's hidden, it's quickly accessible, and it's not cluttering up your screen. And you can come in here, you can see your timers, you can pause them, you can restore them, you can exit out of them completely if you like. Okay. So that's it for manual entry and timers. The last thing I'm going to talk about, or the last method of tracking time, are time cards. Now there's a lot of opportunities to create a time card. One of them, and probably the most common, is the auto time card. And all that really means is that when you complete a task in Office Tools, the system will prompt you to fill out this time card. So down on the bottom of the screen, I have various tasks. It looks like most of them are late. One of them, however, I did finish, and I'm done with this task that you see down here on the bottom for AAA Mortgage. So I'm going to go ahead and check it off of my activity list. And you do that by checking this box over towards the left. When you do that and you check it off, the system, like I said a moment ago, is actually going to create a time card for you. Using the information from that event, it's going to pre-populate as much as it can. So we can see here AAA Mortgage is the client that the time card is going to be associated to. I'm logged in and I'm the one who completed it, so my name is here on the list. It's even going to attempt, if the information is part of that event, to fill in your work codes, to fill in your notes, populate dates and times. However, you can modify all of those and make changes as you see fit. But really, at the end of this, all I have to do is select how much time I would like to track for this particular task. So I'll go ahead and say 1 hour. I say OK. And just as we've seen before through the manual entry, okay, and through the timers, okay, my time card is now entered onto my timesheet. Now there's some other opportunities to have time cards created, and it's going to vary from area to area. One option or one alternative way of doing this is to get a time card without actually completing a specific task. So coming back down here to the bottom, I have a tax return that I'm working on, and I'm not done with it, but I want to enter some time. I don't want to lose track because I track my time every day. So instead of actually completing it by checking the box, I'm going to use the right mouse button and pull up a menu, a right-click menu for this activity list item. There's a lot of options on here, which we'll go into more detail about in another video, but what I want to bring your attention to are the time card and timer options. One of these, specifically what I'm talking about, is to simply create a time card. It doesn't mean I'm completing this task, it just means I want a time card based on the information for this event that I can go ahead and fill out and track my time with. I can also, from here, run a timer. So instead of having to come up to the top of the screen and click on the clock, I can simply right-click on a specific item and choose to start a timer. And it will go ahead and pop up the timer that we saw a moment ago. There are also areas throughout the program where you can have a time card created by clicking a time card button. And you'll see those in the billing area, invoices, things of that sort. But it doesn't just mean time card. It also can mean time cards associated to an event. So to give you an example, I'm actually going to go to a project here. So if I come to the project tab, I can see that I'm working on my corporate return. And on the toolbar, I have the timer button, which again is available, I believe, through every single tab in Office Tools. However, in addition to that, because projects are a very specific thing that we're going to be tracking time for, there is also a time card button. And clicking on this will give me two options. One is to show all the time cards associated to this specific project, or if I'd like, I could simply create a new one. And a lot of people ask me, well, what's the best way to track time in Office Tools? My reply to that is using all three of these methods. Tracking time every day, whenever possible, at every moment, is the best way to track time. It just depends on the circumstances. So to give you some examples of how I would track time throughout my day, is if I'm about to work on something, and I know I'm going to sit down here in a minute or two and I'm going to start cranking away on my work, I'm probably going to run a timer. If it's a task that I do a lot of the day, I'm working on it throughout the day, on a routine basis, I may simply just delegate that task to something that has a timer. Every time I come in and I'm doing some tax prep, I got a timer running for that. I don't have timers running for the other stuff that I do. I do it manually or through time cards for the other stuff. But when I'm working on a return, I'm running a timer. When I've completed something that is outside of the timers that I run, it's not a tax return, it's something else. It's an appointment that I had, I was reviewing something perhaps, and I have an item on my list, I'm going to use the time card. So if I'm about to work on something, that might be a good opportunity to use a timer. If I've already completed it and I want to ensure that I track my time for it, that's where I'm going to use a time card. Manual entry should really kind of be reserved for all of that filler stuff, all that stuff in between that you don't have a reminder for. There's no task or to-do or project set up for any of this work. Timers didn't really work real well because you got caught up in the hallway while you were doing it or something along those lines. So if you're about to go into work, you're going to want to run a timer. If you've already completed it and it's a task in the system, probably a time card. And then at the end of the day, you look at your timesheet, any gaps that you need to fill, any notes about time that you may have in the corner of your desk, you're going to want to manually enter those into Office Tools as a manual time card entry. There's some other really neat tricks about tracking time using timers and time cards, and we'll cover those in some of the tips and tricks videos that we also include in the user guides.